He ran 70 marathons. He carb-loaded by the book. Then he got diabetes. The expert became the patient, and what he discovered shattered everything we thought we knew about nutrition and performance. This isn't just a story, it's a warning. Hello everyone, my name is Marc Bates. I'm a metabolic health coach. This is part of my highlights presentations. He followed the rules and got diabetes, the truth Professor Noakes uncovered. And this one's a little bit personal to me because Professor Tim Noakes is one of my first and biggest mentors as a metabolic health coach. Okay? In fact, I did a lot of my training under his Nutrition Network Foundation, so headquartered out of South Africa. So he is an absolute mentor of mine, and his story is very important. Okay, let's start with Professor Noakes proved that sports nutrition was wrong. Okay, so as I said, he ran over 70 marathons while every sports nutrition followed every sports nutrition guideline perfectly. In fact, he wrote some of them. Okay? He carb-loaded religiously. He fueled with glucose during races. He recovered with high carbohydrate meals. And he still developed diabetes. The contradiction forced him to question everything sports science taught about human metabolism. What he discovered over 7 years of research would challenge decades of established nutritional orthodoxy and ultimately land him in a courtroom defending his professional reputation. His findings reveal that the human body operates fundamentally different than textbooks suggest. Okay, this is one of his first books, The Law of Running, and this is now on the 4th edition. In the first edition, he talks about carb loading and how you need carbs while you're running, especially if you're doing a marathon. Okay, that's all been gone. I mean, I've got videos of the man literally taking his book, ripping out whole sections of it, saying this is garbage. I don't understand why I wrote this. And then he rewrote the book and replaced it with correct science. That's dedication. Okay? So, exercise physiology textbooks state definitively, and they still do, that for some reason, that athletes burn zero fat at 85% maximum oxygen uptake. That's VO2. You may hear that a lot, VO2 uptake. The science seems settled. High-intensity performance required carbohydrates as the exclusive fuel source. Noakes' research shattered this assumption. The FASTER study demonstrated, and that was a study done by Tim Noakes, demonstrated that elite athletes on ketogenic diets could maintain fat oxidation rates even at 86% of VO2 max. These athletes showed 2.3-fold higher peak fat oxidation compared to their carbohydrate counterparts. During the final kilometer of a 25-kilometer time trial, energy derived from fat increased from 33% on a high-carb diet to 86% on a low-carb diet, high-fat diet. Okay? Carbohydrate contribution fell from 66% to just 14%. Just the exact opposite of what everyone expected. The implications were staggering. Everything athletes have been taught about fueling was wrong. What was it all about? Cellular reprogramming. The mechanism behind this metabolic transformation occurs at the mitochondrial level. And if you watch a few of my videos, you know this is where I talk most of the time, right at the cellular level. When athletes restrict carbohydrates for 3 to 4 weeks, their muscle cells undergo significant enzymatic changes. And this is crucial here now, because there have been a number of studies that show there is no difference between a high carb, low fat, and a low carb, high fat for athletes. But the problem is almost every one of those studies only did a 2-week study. And it takes at least 3 to 4 weeks for your body to change over. In fact, there are some more longer term studies done that suggest 6 to 8 weeks is optimal before you start thinking about doing the laboratory tests to see how things are processing. You need time to metabolize for your metabolism to switch over, and that was something that was never taken up beforehand. Okay, and you can look at Dr. Stephen Phinney for some of those studies. Mitochondria upregulate beta oxidation enzymes. All right, carnitine transferase 1 expiration increases dramatically. Beta hydrococal CoA dehydrogenase activity rate rises to handle fatty acid oxidation. These adaptations enable muscles to access intramuscular triglycerides stores rapidly during intense exercise. What that means is that people who are fat adapted access all that extra fat that they have, and even in very lean athletes have still plenty of muscle fat on them, right? The body essentially rewires itself to prefer fat as fuel. But this is the thing, that's why it takes time. Okay? Metabolic flexibility emerges from this cellular reprogramming. Athletes can switch between fuel sources dynamically based on availability and demand. The brain responds to this metabolic stability by reducing protective fatigue mechanisms. Noakes' central governor model explains how the brain regulates performance based on perceived energy threats. When fuel availability appears unlimited, the brain permits greater access to true physiological capacity. All right? Now, and that's very important to understand. But remember, it's this whole thing that your body has to be used to burning fat as fuel. Okay? The personal experiment. Noakes' own metabolic journey provided the most compelling evidence. Despite running extensively and following heart-healthy, high-carbohydrate guidelines since 1977, he discovered he was pre-diabetic with chronically elevated fasting glucose. The diabetes reversal came only after abandoning the dietary recommendations he had promoted for decades. Within months of adapting a ketogenic approach, his HbA1c normalized and his running performance returned to levels he hadn't achieved in 20 years. At age 61, his times matched his 41-year-old self. What he had attributed to aging was actually metabolic dysfunction caused by chronic carbohydrate consumption. The reversal demonstrated that type 2 diabetes represents metabolic inflexibility, not irreversible pancreatic failure. Yeah, and this is important. So he's running better in his 60s than he did in his 40s, and we're actually finding a lot of long distance runners, the extreme distance runners and marathon runners who are getting older are switching to carnivore diets, and they're actually running better than they were in the 40s when they were eating carbs. Okay, same thing happens to a lot of other people. This is real. Okay, institutional backlash. You can't make changes without the powers that be come after you. So challenging established paradigms carries professional risks. Noakes faced a 4-year legal battle after a registered dietitian complained to the Health Professions Council about his dietary recommendations. This is a dietitian telling you this PhD doing studies doesn't know what he's talking about. Good luck. The trial became known as the nutrition trial of the 21st century. There's an entire book on it, which I have. It's wonderful, and it's very enlightening. The complainant was president of the Association for Dietetics in South Africa, an organization sponsored by Nestle, sugar companies, and cereal manufacturers. Follow the money. The institutional resistance revealed how deeply economic interests had penetrated nutritional science. Noakes was ultimately vindicated, but the ordeal exposed the fragility of scientific discourse when profit margins are threatened. Remember, follow the money. Always follow the money. Research that challenges billion-dollar industries faces systematic suppression regardless of its validity. Okay, let's talk about the metabolic revolution. Noakes' work catalyzed the fundamental shift in understanding human metabolism. His research demonstrates that insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes, and metabolic syndrome represent reversible conditions rather than progressive diseases requiring lifelong pharmaceutical management. You don't have type 2 diabetes or you're not pre-diabetic because you have a deficiency in metformin. You're just not eating correctly. Okay? The medical establishment's approach focuses on managing glucose levels through medication. Fat adaptation addresses the root cause by restoring cellular insulin sensitivity and mitochondrial function. Clinical studies now show HbA1c levels dropping from 8.9%, which is well into the diabetic range, to 5.6% range, which is at the point where you can pretty much claim that you have reversed your diabetes within 90 days of ketogenic intervention. Patients discontinue insulin and reverse fatty liver disease through dietary modification alone. These outcomes challenge the entire pharmaceutical model of chronic disease management, because it's not just diabetes and prediabetes. It is almost anything that's considered a chronic disease works well with ketogenic therapy. Okay, athletic performance is redefined. The implications extend beyond metabolic health into athletic performance. Okay, now, once again, this is important. If you're not a marathon runner, does this apply to you? Yes, it does. Okay, always look at the peak performers, try and figure out what they're doing to improve themselves, how it might apply to you. Okay, if peak performers in the ultra long, triathlons, marathons, those things, if they're improving their performance because they're switching over to a ketogenic carnivore type diet, what will that mean for you, the average person? Doesn't mean you're going to immediately start running marathons, but it does mean that you have a great chance of improving your everyday performance and everything. Okay? Keep that in mind. Okay? Fat-adapted athletes and fat-adapted people demonstrate superior endurance capacity, faster recovery, and reduced inflammation compared to their carbohydrate-dependent counterparts. The crossover point where carbohydrate oxidation exceeds fat oxidation shifts from 60% VO2 max to over 80% VO2 max following adaptation. Okay, this metabolic flexibility allows strategic glycogen utilization during truly anaerobic efforts. Anaerobic is where you're not taking in enough oxygen to burn the energy. Okay, and your body starts producing lactate, which is an anaerobic source of energy in the cell, right? But it's not a very clean form of energy, and it does have some side effects, right? Lactic acid burn and all that sort of stuff in the muscles. If you're an athlete, you've been through that. Okay, the longer you can put off that anaerobic effect, the better, and the more performance you're going to get. So athletes report lower perceived exertion at identical workloads. Okay? Key. And remember, for normal people, this helps you in your everyday performance, as you're at work, as you're playing with the kids. Okay? It all comes through. The brain's protective mechanisms relax when fuel availability appears stable and abundant. Performance limitations often reflect neurological constraints rather than muscular capacity. Okay, this is something I can actually agree with 100% from experience. In my college days, I was a power lifter. I hung out with the bodybuilders, but I didn't do the bodybuilding. I was trying to lift for performance weight, right? And at that time, we had some coaches from the Soviet Union's, and yeah, that's how long ago this was, okay? From the Soviet Union's Olympic weightlifting team came and visited us in college, and just you were working with us. And one of the things that they did, which I thought was profound, was they did this test. They asked you what you could actually do as a maximum bench press. And so they said, okay, close your eyes. And what they did was that they put a very low weight on there, and they said, push it and do it. And you did it and said, how hard was that? And you say, oh, that's 60%, 70% of what I could do. They said, okay, that was pretty low weight then. They didn't tell you what it was. They said, but that was a pretty low weight. So what we're going to do is we're going to now put it up to your maximum. And you should be able to lift that easily because you've told us that's your maximum. What they would do is they would put it up and they would add some 20 kilograms more. That's 40 pounds, 44 pounds, okay, or more. And you had to keep your eyes closed. And then they have you visualize lifting that weight 2 or 3 times. And then they say, okay, lift the weight. You've done this weight before. This is your maximum. And lift it. And you'd lift it. And they'd put it down. They said, open your eyes. And you'd look at the bar. And you were lifting, 20 plus kilograms more than you've ever lifted. And you didn't even feel it. The brain controls a bunch of your performance. Well, if your brain thinks that you're running out of fuel, it's going to shut down your performance athletically. Same thing happens if you're running out of fuel because you're eating the wrong stuff. Your brain's going to slow down everything else. You want maximum performance? Shift. Okay, let's talk about the paradigm shift. Noakes' legacy transcends sports nutrition. His willingness to challenge his own life's work demonstrates scientific integrity in an era of institutional orthodoxy. Remember, I told you about him tearing up the book. I mean, the guy had decades teaching people this is how you run, this is how you maximize performance. And he said, this is all hogwash. What I've been teaching you is wrong. And he changed everything. The research he did revealed that human physiology operates according to evolutionary principles rather than modern nutritional guidelines. Fat represents the body's preferred fuel source, with carbohydrates serving as a rapid-acting but metabolically disruptive alternative. Carbohydrates are rapid-acting, so you get some quick energy from it, but they're metabolically disruptive. And that's important. Future generations of athletes, clinicians, and researchers can explore metabolic flexibility without the constraints of carbohydrate dogma, thanks to Tim Noakes. The scientific foundation has been established despite institutional resistance. The transformation from glucose-dependent to metabolically flexible represents a return to ancestral metabolic programming. And for anyone who's an athlete of any kind, this is paramount. If you're being told to carb load, question it immediately. Okay? There's a practical implementation. The transition from carbohydrate dependency to fat adaptation does require strategic implementation. You have to be, mindful of what you're doing. Initial glycogen depletion creates temporary energy deficits as enzymatic adaptations occur. Mitochondrial reprogramming typically requires 3 to 4 weeks, right, for initial adaptation and 6 to 20 months for complete optimization, right? You want to become the best marathon runner you can be, and you're going to switch over to a fat adaptive marathon runner, 6 to 20 months for complete optimization. It takes time. Athletes must adjust training intensity during this transition period. The process involves eliminating refined carbohydrates, increasing healthy fat intake, and allowing adequate adaptation time. Metabolic flexibility emerges as the body regains its ability to switch between fuel sources efficiently. Success depends on understanding that this represents cellular reprogramming rather than dietary restriction. We're not telling you not to eat stuff. What we're telling you to do is reprogram your cells. And to reprogram your cells to be the most efficient they can be, you have to only eat certain types of foods. You have to ignore the cakes and the cookies and all that other stuff, which you probably know you're supposed to anyways. All right? So should be no surprise there. Okay, the future of metabolic health. Noakes' research provides a blueprint for addressing the chronic disease epidemic through metabolic intervention rather than pharmaceutical management. Listen, you don't have to be a long-term runner. You don't have to be a marathoner for this research to mean a whole lot to you. Understand that they are learning so much about how metabolic health and flexibility affects elite performance athletes that it does transcend down to the average person and your health. Okay? The approach targets root causes instead of symptoms. Healthcare systems built on managing chronic conditions face disruption from interventions that restore health completely. Think about that. Follow the money again. The economic implications explain much of the institutional resistance to metabolic approaches. Patient empowerment through metabolic literacy, that's asking me questions, listening to my videos, represent a fundamental threat to current medical models. Education replaces medication as the primary therapeutic intervention. The future belongs to those who understand metabolism at the cellular level. Professor Noakes proved that scientific truth ultimately prevails over institutional orthodoxy. His courage to challenge established paradigms opened pathways for metabolic health that will benefit generations of athletes and patients seeking optimal human performance. The revolution begins with understanding that the body possesses innate wisdom. The challenge lies in removing the obstacles that prevent its expression. All right. Thanks for watching. If you have any comments or questions, please, you know the drill. Leave them in the comments section. This is a community. I'm here to answer your questions and help you learn. If you have specific things you're looking for, leave me a note, and we'll work on it. And also, if you haven't already done so, please like, subscribe, share this video with somebody who may be interested. You may know a runner who's carb loading and they want to get the best. Send them this video. Okay? You're doing them a big favor. All right. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a great day.